What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Movie Battleground. We have another match in this big tournament that is happening that I'm personally kind of very excited about because these two players are really good. I've lost to one twice, and then the other one I have not. I don't think I've faced yet, but he's a really big up and comer, and I just can't wait to see these two face off. I don't think they have yet. So this is going to be a very interesting matchup. I'm not going to delay it too much longer. We have Noah McCausland versus Joe Farrelly today. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to go ahead with the lower ranked competitor, I believe, first. So I'm going to bring in Mr. Noah McLovin McCausland. Noah, what's up, man? How's it going?
Pretty good. I'm excited for this. Joe he's Joe. He's
He's
known as being a top tier competitor, regardless of what you're in, like trivia, debate. He's known as being like one of the best, and so to have the opportunity to play against him is something I'm really looking forward to. Um, Honestly, I'm hoping that I win. I think everyone always hopes that they win, but I'm not going to be surprised when I don't, and I'm not going to beat myself up about it unless I make some stupid mistake. But um, I'm just here to have a good time. Like this is something we do for fun, and I enjoy this, so I'm ready to get into it.
Absolutely. Yep. Joe is definitely like he was the original champion of this new iteration of the movie Battleground. He's shown that he's just fire. If you give him, an inch, he's going to take a mile, that kind of a thing. So, just, yeah. But Noah comes at you with a 4-3 record with one knockout. That's something that I still don't have that I really want, but you can't always get what you want, I guess, right? So we're going to go ahead and knock Noah into the back and bring out his competitor. And introducing second with a record of 6-2 and 2 KOs, Joe Hot Fuzz Farrelly. What's up, Joe? How's it going, man?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Taking a slightly different approach to this debate tonight. We'll see if it pays off, but
Ooh.
we'll see. And just in terms of my prep.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah. So prepping anew. Any thoughts on Noah?
Yeah, Noah's one of these people. He's sort of quite new to this community, but you notice it. He's already got the stuff. Like you see him in trivia, he's very good. And then you've seen obviously what he's starting to do in debate as well is starting to come through as well. So one of those sort of exciting new competitors that you see every now and again. You're just like, well, keep an eye on that one.
Absolutely. And that man preps. So, maybe we got some differences in prep here. And I can't wait to see you guys go at it. So we're going to drop Joe in the back. And actually, no, we're not. We're just going to bring Noah in. And then we're going to get into the rules first. Wait a second. Stop camera. All right. Get into the rules, but let me get that graphic going. All right. Movie Battleground is a best of 5 rounds. First player to 3 points wins the match. Each round is worth 1 point. And if one player gets 3 points in a row, well, they win by knockout. If there is a tie after round 4, then after round 4, then the round 5 will initiate, and that will be the blind round.
I'm sure that's something that both of us hope doesn't happen.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone dreads that. Each round of regular debate has 4 stages. You have your 60-second opening, your 2-minute expansion solo pitch. Then you're going to have a 4-minute open debate between the two competitors. And then finally, a 60-second closing to close out your point. So let's get into this here with the first question. Question number 1. What is the most overrated Disney animation film? We have Strange World coming out. We don't know if that's underrated or overrated, but I guess time will tell when we approach that at the end of the month. If you guys can actually give me who goes first on the first question. Do you guys remember?
Give me 2 seconds.
I'm thinking it might be Noah.
Scrolling.
It is me. It is me.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So I believe Joe was probably given the choice here, and it was chosen to go. He chose to go first on second and fourth round. So Noah is going first on the first round and the third round. So Noah is going to start this one. There's the question, and let me bring out that timer. And all right, Noah, I'll give you those 2 seconds. Noah, when you are ready, your minute will start.
The Little Mermaid is the first Disney movie in the Renaissance era. It helped save the company and open the door for the classics we know and love today to be made, like Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, and Hercules. Its songs are still played today and loved by all, but this film is massively mistaken for what it actually is, despite all the backlash with the new remake coming out. It's about time one came out to fix the huge problems with this movie. It has a horrible message for little girls and boys that your intrinsic value comes from your looks rather than your wit and personality. And it perpetuates the sexualization of minors. Ariel is 16 in this movie. And somehow her trying to court and marry Prince Eric in this movie is okay. It's high time we stop remembering this film as a masterpiece and understand the problems that come with it. And I will yield my time.
All right. We're just going to let that time tick down a little bit. And then once it does, we will pause it. And then, Joe, your first minute starts when you begin speaking.
For me, when you look at it's the difference between overrated, best, and worst, I think there is a distinct difference between the words overrated and the words best and worst. For me, the most overrated Disney animation film is actually Frozen. Because it's not just how it scores with audience or how it scores with critics. It's a Disney movie. It's about how it goes on and how it affects. You look at movies like Toy Story that stayed in the zeitgeist and stayed relevant, merchandising and all that sort of stuff. There's a reason for that. But you look at a movie like Frozen and the way it's just spread across from what is actually a very basic movie, a very average Disney movie. You look at the era it came out and the other films it was surrounded by that actually don't get that sort of attention, which actually I think convey better messages, more important, just the characters are more involved, they're more relatable. Films like Zootopia and Moana, all these films sort of came out around the same era, yet they don't get the love that Frozen gets, and it doesn't quite make sense to the actual story contained within Frozen.
All right, there we go. We're going to stop this clock here. All right, and now we're going to get into the 2-minute expansion period. Noah, your 2 minutes will start when you begin speaking.
Frozen is the easy and maybe the obvious pick here for the question, but it's not the right one when you actually delve deeper into it. It's easy to shit on this film and say it's overrated by how much it was played and how much people were talking about it, but it's within reason. This movie is so good. It deserves all the hype around it. The message is incredibly powerful and important for the younger generations to see, as well as all of us older people to remember. This movie teaches children and reminds the adults how important love is, not just the romantic love, but love in general. Love for your family, friends, and even strangers. The visuals are not surprisingly gorgeous, and the songs are played so much for a reason. Aside from the visuals, characters, and the plot, the music stood out on its own. I think the musical aspect of this movie contributed to a big part of its success. Christabel and Idina Menzel did a great job with the voiceovers, but even a better job with singing. Songs are some of the best and repeated for a reason. Let It Go is not only catchy, but stresses the importance of embracing who you are. This song, like others in the movie, furthers the plot and the characters in genius ways. Olaf is one of the best Disney sidekicks, and not only is he played so comedically well by Josh Gad, but this character is so loyal and supportive of other characters. Anna is relatable. She's clumsy, funny, unsure, naive, but at the same time just lovable, understanding, and loyal. She doesn't have the perfect posture nor the best manners, but I think that's what makes her so real. One of the most jaw-dropping moments of Frozen came when the audiences realized that the act of true love that Anna was in pursuit of was not actually with a man. She didn't need to kiss Hans or Kristoff. All she had to do was protect her sister. The bonds of sisterhood were the strongest between any characters in the film, and the moment proved to be an effective subversion of what characters owe to love. But Little Mermaid is just so regressive and limits female agency, and you really don't have many good characters. Prince Eric is just bland and not unique as a character, and King Triton is honestly just abusive. Frozen is beloved because it changed the game and the formula and gave us something new. Kids and adults like that movie because it's something different than what we have been getting for the last 50 years.
And that's time. All right. Now we're going to go on to Joe's 2 minutes, and that clock will begin ticking when, Joe, you begin speaking.
I think what you have to understand about Frozen is that it came out in an era when Disney was sort of changing its message. And yes, I do agree the message of love, non-romantic love is important, but at the end of the day, you have movies within that era that did it so much better, yet don't get the attention that Frozen gets, hence the overrated segment of this argument. You look at a film like Moana, and that is properly about agency, and it's not about agency. It's about your independence as well. Yes, she goes off and finds this demigod, but it's not that romance thing. That's to do the bits that she can't do because they are demigod stuff. The rest of it comes into that. And Frozen itself, it's still about the reliance and all that sort of stuff. But you go back to the Little Mermaid, and I think you're judging it with you're judging it with 35 years of development and mental evolution. At the end of the day, it is a kids movie. The kids do not delve that deep under the surface, despite this movie taking place under the sea. And you compare the companions. You look at Josh Gad playing Olaf. After a while, it doesn't take long for that to get very tired and very old very, very quickly. Even as an adult looking at it, I agree. I think it gets up. But you look at Sebastian, I think that's a character that, it's the advisor, and it's still, and I think even going back now after 35 years, you look at a companion like Sebastian, I think that is much more entertaining and enjoyable. And you actually delve a little bit deeper into the messages and stuff. And it's about, you have Ariel who's going into this world and trying to go out on her own, age 16, and let's point that out, age 16. And then you have the parent advising completely against it. She goes against it, tries trust someone who's going to offer everything she wants. And it turns out that's not the right thing to do. And that is a very important message right there. That sometimes you do have to listen to others coming in. Whereas Frozen, it's a very, the music itself is catchy, but I think that's the only part of it that actually stays. The story itself is a very basic story, very self-contained, and it doesn't quite work, especially when you look at what came out around it.
And that's time. Great. So now we're going to get into the 4-minute open debate. The timer will begin when either competitor begins speaking.
So the moral of A Little Mermaid was supposed to be somewhere along the lines of don't be afraid to follow your dreams, or the world is full of wonderful things. Get out of your comfort zone and learn about them. But looking at the finished project, the moral turned out a bit worse. The film seems to push the idea that breaking rules will get you what you want with no problem, and that women need to be married to be happy. And you're saying that King Triton is this force that is trying to tell her
no problems, that's the message he's trying to teach, despite the fact that she completely loses her voice, is completely betrayed, and almost loses absolutely everything. Yeah, no problems whatsoever.
Whereas, what are you referring to?
Everything that Ursula does to her, go out and follow your dreams. Yet she tries to do that, and look exactly what happens to her. She almost loses her voice. She's betrayed. Her friends nearly die. Everything, Sebastian is nearly killed in a kitchen. You say there's no problems, but that's the exact opposite of what happens. And the fact of the matter is, we're judging this movie based on, it's 35 years old at this point. I think that's something you have to remember, is at this point, it's a film that was based on a book. The kids themselves, they don't actually delve that far below the surface. They just want to go see an entertaining movie. And after 35 years, The Little Mermaid is still an entertaining movie. Yet after, 9 years?
You can't judge a movie just
these things don't hold up.
You can't judge a movie just because it's a kids movie that you shouldn't delve any deeper into it.
I'm not saying
movies are supposed to be I'm saying, but you're saying we're only supposed to be judging this based off that it's a kids movie, but you have it's made for adults too, which is why the message is so important, because adults can pull from this as well. Frozen has both of that. Little Mermaid is literally just about, men really only care about what you look like and not about your voice and everything like that. Literally, Ariel doesn't talk at all when in the middle act of this movie, when she's trying to court Eric, and he's just going along with it because she's another pretty girl. It's a bad message for little girls, and it's overrated because it's been beloved for the past 50 years with its songs and everything like that. Frozen completely changed the game. It came in and it told you don't need to be married to be happy, you don't need a man to be happy, and it has amazing songs, and it's so popular for a reason. It's because it's actually good, and it changed the Disney recipe.
I think you might be arguing a little bit about why Little Mermaid maybe has a bad message, but we're talking about overrated versus underrated. And you look at the Little Mermaid. This is a film that is 35 years old nearly, and it's a film that is still still up there. The music is still popular. The characters, you look at people like Sebastian, the wonderful voice performance from Jodie Benson. These are all the things that keep this movie relevant, and there's a reason that after 35 years it's still there. The problem with Frozen is it was the music that really projected it. It was the constant playing of Let It Go on the radios and stuff like that that kept it relevant. But even now, you look at the sequel. That sequel came out. That sequel was not good. It did not. And you look at the films that came out around it within that era that are less popular than Frozen. When you look at the message that they try to convey, I think that's the difference about why Frozen specifically is overrated, is because it doesn't, even after 9 years, doesn't have that cultural significance that The Little Mermaid still does after 35.
Let It Go is obviously the best song out of the Frozen category, but they have completely it uplifts the rest of that song, that soundtrack. Love is an Open Door is a wonderful song. You have in Summer, you have all these other songs that are great in Frozen. And the only two that you could probably say you remember from Little Mermaid is Under the Sea, Part of Your World, Kiss the Girl. It doesn't really, it's not memorable.
You just said
at
two,
all.
that's three.
Okay, that's three. You're arguing about one number.
And in Summer is Josh Gad being annoying as he usually is.
All right, and that was the open round. Great job, guys. Now we're going to go into the closings. So since Noah started this round, Noah can close it out. The timer will begin for your final minute, Noah, when you begin speaking.
Frozen is a tale about growing up, becoming your own person, and learning not to be ashamed of yourself. And yes, fine, these are elements shared by many movies aimed at kids, but damn it, Frozen just does it so well. Because adults hate anything they hear thousands of times doesn't make this a bad movie, and in no way does it make it overrated. This is the second movie of this Disney era to come out after Big Hero 6, which is underrated, honestly, in my opinion. So Joe trying to compare this movie to the other ones is just invalid, because this set the precedent. This is where they said, oh, this is where Disney princess movies are changing. You don't get that with Ariel. Little Mermaid is just hailed as like one of the classic Disney films, the classic Disney princesses. But when you go back and actually look about why this movie is problematic, she's a bratty person, sexualizing of a teenager. Women only need to shut their mouths to be married. It's a bad moral.
And that's time. All right. So now we'll go to Joe for his final minute. Time will begin when you begin speaking.
Once again, I think we're comparing overrated to best and worst. You look at why Frozen is overrated, because after only 9 years, it's still something that, the music constantly gets played when there's been other music that since then and before then, which doesn't get played as much. You look at The Little Mermaid, that came out in an era of Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King. A movie has not been made, a musical has not been done for The Little Mermaid, but it has been done for Frozen after 9 years. And this is we're talking 35 years of difference here. So I really don't think you can call The Little Mermaid overrated when other films that have come out within its era and even further since are having musicals made about them. Whereas Frozen itself is a movie that only came out 9 years ago. It's got movies in and around it that I think tell a better message, tell a more important message, and have songs that are much more catchy. And I think that's what makes a Disney movie. You can talk about the sexualization of a teenage girl, but you look at all Disney movies, most of those people are within that era, so it doesn't really fit within that, saying that just The Little Mermaid does it. And I think that's the difference.
And that's time. All right, round, guys. We're going to go ahead and take you guys out and bring in the judges. Wait a second. Got to do this right. There we go. All right. So we have I forgot to mention at the top, we have Richie, we have Haven, and we have my wife Carrie to judge today. Let's start with Richie. Go ahead and give us our sorry about that. Richie, go ahead and give us who you thought won and what sold you, and take around like 30 seconds around that.
All right, all right. Well, yeah, I think that both are good points, but ultimately I went with Joe. I think Noah got too bogged down with the messaging of of Little Mermaid, and I think Joe had good counterpoints to how kids aren't gonna sort of aren't gonna get that. And yeah, I think he talked. I think Joe talked more about why the movie Frozen's overrated as a whole, and not just the messaging. So I went with Joe for that reason.
Great. All right, cool. So let's go over to Haven for his who you thought won, why, and keep it to around like 30 seconds. Do you hear me, Haven?
Oh, you were kind of breaking up. Sorry. All right, this is easy for me. Yeah, thank no so many 16 years old, that message for children. Frozen was big, and Frozen deserves all the hype. How important love is, that Frozen message was. He put a lot of facts into it. Prince Eric, and the morale or the moral of the story. Well received now that we're women, and he just kept talking about the 35-year movies were better. The music is great. I don't know what importance was musicals made from Frozen, but I just think that Noah hit a lot of points, so I'm gonna give it to Noah.
All right, so we have a split here. So we're going to go to Carrie for the deciding vote. Carrie, who won it for you? Why? And keep it to around 30 seconds.
I'll say this was really close for me. I was like really between them the whole time, and I think they both had great arguments. I think I gave the slight edge. I give the slight edge to Noah in this one. I think he just brought up a lot of good points, and I felt like both of them wound up discussing The Little Mermaid a lot more than Frozen, and why I just heard a lot of points from Noah about why Little Mermaid was overrated.
All right, so Noah's going to go ahead and get that point. Thank you very much, judges. We're going to go ahead and drop you into the back, bring the competitors.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and move on to round number 2. And just like magic, Chad has become somebody who you really didn't want to see here tonight. What's up, guys? I am back. Shout out to Chad for getting the match going for me. We had a slight time conflict at the last minute on my end, and Chad was great about stepping in and getting this match going. Thank you, sir. His reward is he gets to sit in the back and watch this match and not have to worry about jack shit. These two guys, however, they got something to worry about. How are we doing, guys? I'm just meeting them right now. How's it going?
Going okay.
Not bad.
All right. Well, then let's go ahead and keep it moving. We're going to go ahead and move on to question number 2 in this matchup. And this comes at a time we just saw the release of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which you could almost argue is a re-origin of sorts for Wakanda within the MCU. I mean, if for all intents and purposes, the entire Wakandan world was centered around the character of T'Challa, and per the decision of Marvel and Ryan Coogler, they've made the choice to move on without that central figure and reestablish a whole new way of viewing Wakanda. And I think that leads to a very interesting discussion of origins within the MCU. Obviously, we know we had a lot of them at the forefront. We've had some characters that have been introduced in not quite origins, and we've had it delivered in different ways. But the question here is, what is the best origin story film of the MCU? And there is a lot to pick from. So we'll go ahead and turn it over. Joe, you are up first on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it to you. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Phase 1 of the MCU, I still think it's fantastic. Yes, there's been some amazing movies that have come out since, but the origin story, I think, is really where you get to know this character. And I think it's also very important to sort of set up where they're going to go from here, not just in terms of the MCU itself. Remember, this is the best origin story within the MCU, not just in terms of how it is as an origin story, but how it fits as an origin story within the MCU. For me, that movie is Captain America: The First Avenger. I think this movie does everything so well, not just in terms of setting up Steve Rogers as a hero, in terms of mapping out where his journey is going to go throughout the MCU and throughout his own trilogy itself. I think Captain America: The First Avenger as a movie works very well. It's entertaining, it's fun, it's a great comic book movie, and as an origin story, it sets up everything perfectly, which is why also the sequels themselves are so highly rated. And I think that's one of the many elements that makes it perfect.
And time. All right. Noah, we're going to go back over to you, sir. 1 minute on the clock when you're ready.
When this question was asked, I was considering choosing something like maybe Shang-Chi or Guardians, but there was no way I could just not choose Iron Man. This is the movie. This is the movie that started it all. It still ranks as in the top of MC movies. And there's like 29, 30-ish movies in the MCU right now. This movie gives a complete and believable character arc for Tony. And while he is an asshole and a bit of a narcissist, he is still so likable. And this is somewhat thanks to Robert Downey Jr. playing him. Jeff Bridges is so incredibly menacing as Obadiah Stane. The casting is incredible, not only for Tony Stark and Obadiah, but for the other characters as well. There are so many incredible scenes of this movie, as well as the wonderful soundtrack. This movie was a huge risk for Marvel, taking a character non-comic book fans wouldn't really know about and turned it into a huge success. This is Jon Favreau's best directed movie and is easily the best origin film in the MCU. I'll leave the rest.
All right, and that will be time. All right, you sad lot of fanboys, you can breathe. Captain Marvel was not brought up. You do not have to boycott our show. With that said, we will continue with friendly discussion. Joe, you are back on the hot seat when ready.
I think the reason Captain America: The First Avenger is the best origin story film in the MCU is that it does a lot more for the MCU than Iron Man does. Not for a second saying that Iron Man is not a great movie. Not even saying this is not a great origin story. I love Iron Man. But I think First Avenger does a lot more. Not only is it able to perfectly set up Steve Rogers so you understand who this person is from pretty much his first, scene in that alleyway trying to, stand up to the bully in the cinema. I can do this all day. That's great. But the journey he goes on, learning through Erskine about how he has to stay a good man inside, the journey he goes through with Peggy and with Red Skull and with Colonel Phillips, all this sort of stuff sort of builds him up as a character. And I haven't even gotten into Bucky yet. But I think this is what makes it a great origin story, because it sets up a character. It tells a story from start to finish. You have the journey with the Tesseract and trying to defeat Red Skull. So you have that movie contained within. You have the love story with Peggy and that tragic ending that he unfortunately gets. But then you have the other stuff it sets up for the MCU as a whole. Obviously, you have Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, still going strong in the MCU. You have the one of the first appearances of an Infinity Stone. This is the first Infinity. This sets up the entire trajectory of the first three phases of the MCU. You have the dance with Peggy, which is the perfect bookend for Captain America's story. You have all these things that come on. The arc is there, the character arc of him learning that it wasn't just the serum he needed. Look, Iron Man is great, but in terms of what it does for the MCU as a whole, it's just the origin story of Iron Man and then that post-credit scene at the end. Nothing else really sticks. It's not until you get into the Avengers that you get the journey for Iron Man, which is going to be throughout the rest of the MCU with that line, you're not one to make the self-sacrifice, spoken conveniently by Captain America. And I think that's the difference. They're both great movies, but I think in terms of an origin story, not just for the hero, but for the MCU as a whole, I think
time
works better.
All right, Noah, back over to you when ready.
In an origin story, especially a superhero origin story, you want to see who the character was before the event, the change itself, and how it affects their life, and how do they use it to become a better person and help others. The main element at the forefront of origin movies is the character development. In movies named after the character, we want and need to see that development. That's exactly what Iron Man gives you. Before Tony was captured, he was extremely self-centered and created and sold weapons used to hurt and kill people. During the cave sequence, we see the bond between Jensen and Tony grow and how the loss of Jensen changes Tony. We see through the writing of this film and DJ's performance the impact this has on him. He comes back and refuses to make more weapons despite being a weapons manufacturing company. And the genius of the shift is that it doesn't change him entirely as a person. He still has the same personality and is a little abrasive at times, but yet he is now focused on helping people and protecting them rather than enabling pain and war. He sees the error of his ways and is intent on fixing his mistakes and taking responsibility. The first Avenger doesn't give you a fraction of that. Steve is already a good person, morally righteous to begin with. There is no development of Steve Rogers into anything past a short-minded blockhead who basically takes steroids to fight super Nazis. The only thing that changes is his body. He isn't a compelling character to watch because we don't see him struggle internally with anything. This movie would be a whole lot more interesting if we saw the internal fight between what is the right thing to do is and what Steve wants to do. They even make the suspense of how Bucky's death would affect Steve away by just having Cap be sad. There's nothing unique or realistic here, and as the titular character, the movie's success rests on our connection to his character. When it's clear the director made no visible attempt to do this, I have to ask, what's the point? Joe is focusing on how Captain America is good for the MCU and how it sets up the MCU. It sets up Winter Soldier, which is way better than the first Avenger, yes, but Iron Man is better than both these movies, and we're not even talking about Civil War.
All right, that will wrap up the 2-minute segment. We're going to go ahead and go into the open discussion. The timer will start back up for you guys when the first competitor speaks.
So I think one of the issues is that you talk about how this is what origin stories do. It has to show that it doesn't necessarily have to do that. I think other origin stories do that, but I think it's actually quite rare to have a hero who already has the qualities of a hero but lacks the strength. But even when he gains that strength, he does have that struggle because despite having that body change, everyone around him except Peggy, doesn't think he is capable because they still see him as that small person. And it's about changing that view, about showing that what Erskine said about him being the good person is what made him the hero. And it's about showing that around that, which I think, especially in terms of a Second World War story, it's actually quite an important thing to show. Iron Man is a very great story and it's a great origin film, but unfortunately the setup isn't quite paid off throughout the rest of the MCU or through the Iron Man trilogy. There are points where he sort of goes back into that person. He goes back into the sort of the selfish kind of person. It isn't until the Avengers where you get that line from Steve Rogers about making the self-sacrifice, that the origin where, it's an origin story. So you're setting up an arc here. That's where the arc truly begins, because that's what the payoff is at the end of Endgame when he does finally make that self-sacrifice. Whereas
you're making the mistake
is set up that way.
You're making the mistake of trying to compare these movies to the MCU as a whole because you're scared of comparing Captain America to Iron Man, because Iron Man is the way better origin story. It's an origin story. It's an origin story. It's an origin story. You have to have how the superhero originated. You have to have that character arc. It doesn't matter what the character arc is for the rest of the MCU. You have to have about it in the movie. We're talking about these movies. You have no character arc with Steve. He's not trying to fight to be a good person, or he's not learning anything. He already has those intrinsic values of being a good person. We see Tony go from this narcissistic person to this person who realizes, I fucked up. I have to change. I have to fix this. You see that complete arc. And you trying to say, Captain America sets up Winter Soldier and Civil War and all. Those are still better than movies than this. But you can't compare it to those movies.
An origin story implies that there's going to be further stories along the line. By completing Tony Stark's arc within Iron Man, you don't really get much of a setup until you set up something new later on in the Avengers. But with Captain America, the first Avenger, what you get is you get an arc set up. You get him promising Peggy that dance. You get the origin of the Infinity Stones, but you also get the origin of Captain America as a whole and how he became this person, how he was able to translate his goodness into something more positive, which he was unable to do until he was given the super soldier serum, and learning from Dr. Erskine about being that person on the inside. And that's something that he maintains throughout, despite the issues that happen with Bucky throughout the rest of the series. This is the point. This is an origin story. An origin story is there to set up what's coming later, right? Iron Man, Tony Stark completes his arc from going from that selfless person into the hero by the end of Iron Man. So they have to completely bring him back into that selfish person he was in movies like the Avengers.
All right, so if you want to bring in the MCU, that's fine, even though we're not supposed to.
Best origin film in the MCU is the question.
Right, yeah, right. So if you're trying to compare to that, then there's no question that Iron Man still has the better origin story and arc throughout the entire series. Why else would we cry so hard when Tony Stark dies at the end of this? We
because of the arc itself.
we see different arcs.
Not in
We
Iron
see
Man.
different arcs in every movie, and we see how this one started it all too. It's nothing different except for you actually have a character arc in the first movie. You don't see that. Like Captain America is not an interesting character to watch. We see no development from him. He's continuously a good person from the start of
You see
Captain
that struggle.
America
You
to
see
the
when
end
he's
of
drawn,
Endgame.
when he
You
does the
don't see
drawing
that
of the
struggle at
monkey
all.
on a unicycle, you can see that struggle within him because he knows what the army is making him out to be, a showgirl, as Colonel Phillips says. But he can show
And time.
proving difference.
All right, so we're going to go into the 1 minute closings for the round. Joe, you will have yours up first. The timer will start back up when you begin speaking.
Captain America: The First Avenger shows the person Steve Rogers before. Other origin stories show the complete arc of a bad character turning into the hero. But what Captain America: The First Avenger does differently is it shows that he has those good qualities, but it lacks the physical strength to be able to do it in that war setting. What First Avenger does really well is that not only does it tell a great story from beginning to end with the story of the war and the battle against Red Skull, but it lays these little things in that are going to come in later in the MCU and later in Captain America's story. That's the important thing about an origin film. It's about stuff that sets up for later payoffs. What Iron Man does, it tells that story from beginning to end because they didn't know what the success was going to be. They didn't know how it was going to be, and they leave that credit scene at the end. And it has to get slightly undone in certain movies, which makes it a poor origin story because it didn't leave room for growth, which is what you do with an origin story. You have to leave room for growth, which is what Captain America does. It tells the story perfectly. Joe Johnston directs it very well for a war film, and Jon Favreau tells a great story from beginning to end, but doesn't leave that room for growth.
And time. All right, Noah, back over to you. You have the final minute of the round when ready.
Imagine being so desperate that you have to fight against, that you have to argue that because of one end credit scene that, oh, my movie is obviously way better than yours now. This is origin, the best origin story. It's clear it's Iron Man because we see that origin of him. We see how he originates as a character. We see that change in a character. And yes, you can argue that, oh, Captain America might have this arc or the entire MCU. Iron Man still has a better character arc in the entire MCU than Captain America does. Why else would we cry more in Endgame when we see Tony die? There's no other reason. Oh, we see Cap say goodbye with the shield and everything. Oh, that's sad. We care more about Tony because we've seen where he's come from. We've seen him come from this selfish person who's narcissistic into this person who is willing to die for not the world, but the fucking universe. Iron Man sets that up way better than Captain America does, and is a better movie in general.
And time. All right, excellent round, guys. Real great back and forth there. I'm going to go ahead and put you guys in the back and bring the judges in for the deliberation here. All right, and Haven is supposed to be up first, but it looks like there may be some sort of freeze on that end. So for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and move down to Carrie first. Who gets your vote, and what was the main thing that sold you?
Again, this was really, really close. I am going to give my point to Joe, though. I think he just had overall the better argument.
Okay. And then Richie, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, this was really tough, but I think I would also give it to Joe just because I think he had he made a good point about how Captain America better sets up the arc whereas Iron Man like his arc sort of complete and they have to sort of go in a different direction in order to to kind of get that sort of redemption for Stark later on. Whereas I think in general, I think Captain America's origin story is more successful in setting up future events. So I went with Joe.
All right, so we're going to go ahead. It is 1-1. We'll go ahead and move on to question number 3. And speaking of the MCU, someone who recently entered the MCU, albeit not through film, is a man by the name of Oscar Isaac, a man who many of people like. Whether you saw him in Star Wars with his bromance with John Boyega, or you saw him in Dune with that luscious beard, Oscar Isaac is a man who over the last 10 years has found himself more and more building to an incredible career after being around for many years as just this guy in small movies or in the background of bigger films. He is truly, you could argue, one of the modern day stars. So that brings us to the question, what is the best film featuring or starring Oscar Isaac? So we're going to go ahead and get into it. Noah, you are back up first this time around, so I'll throw you the timer and it will start ticking when you begin speaking.
I'm going to admit right now, this is my strength. When I chose Oscar Isaac as my strength, I had a certain movie in mind that I was going to pick, but I abandoned it for a film that is technically and artistically better. Ex Machina not only is extremely entertaining and attention-grabbing movie, it's incredibly smart in everything it tries to do. This movie uses point of view to keep the audience engaged. This is Ava's story, make no mistake. It's Ava's story told through Caleb. The revelation of information is what keeps the audience engaged, and this can only be done through Caleb. This movie is not too smart where it alienates its audience, but is smart enough to encourage the audience to participate in the movie and gets them to think not only about what they are seeing on screen, but the morals and the themes the film is discussing. The special effects are absolutely beautiful and won this film an Oscar. The film was also nominated for Best Original Screenplay, but it's not really faulted for losing to something like Spotlight. I'll yield my time.
All right. So with that, Joe, we're going to go back over to you for your 1 minute opening. The timer will start back up when you're ready.
I think over the last decade or so, I think Oscar Isaac has been an absolute just revelation. Just the more and more he comes to the forefront, I think the more and more entertaining it becomes. And just watching everything he can do as an actor, I think is phenomenal. And I think that really is encapsulated not just in his performance, but also in the direction, the story choices, and just the overall vibe of Inside Llewyn Davis. This is a movie that really does it allows Isaac to rise to the forefront, but not just that. The Coens have always had this ability to create a vibe in their movies and create a world, even though it's everything they do is set in our world. I think Inside Llewyn Davis does that, and I think for a sort of a musical movie about the music industry and someone in that industry, I think it does something very unique in that it keeps itself very self-contained, and it's not a journey to success. It's just a week in this man's life, and I think it's a fascinating, fantastic movie.
All right. And because there was a slight audio blip in my ear, I'm going to assume it happened on the recording. Maybe it did or maybe it didn't. But just to recap for the judges and the viewers at home, Noah's pick was Ex Machina. Joe's was Inside Llewyn Davis. That way we're all on track there. Because for a second when you said it, I did miss it that you had said it. That's why I was late on the banner. So with that said, we're going to go back over to you, Noah. You have 2 minutes on the clock. Time starts when you begin speaking.
Inside Llewyn Davis feels like you are sitting through a concert or watching an hour and 40-minute long music video. The movie has fantastic songs and beautifully shot scenes, but this aimless story fails to capture the audience's attention. It's just straight up boring. The personality of this film doesn't work too. Having the Coen's brother direct this might not have been the best idea. Seems like the Please Mr. Kennedy recording just feels so absurd and out of left field, it takes the audience away from the movie. Llewyn is an asshole and there are moments of comedy, but it doesn't fit into the overall theme of the film and doesn't help the audience relate to Llewyn. Even if we aren't supposed to like him, and we are supposed to relate to him and understand his life, but his treatment of characters makes us feel no sympathy for him. Ex Machina, however, is an engaging movie and it keeps the audience's attention. Using Caleb as a character who, throughout the film, learns new pieces of knowledge along with the audience is a genius way to introduce little twist and even the big one at the end. This film practices brevity, being concise by not having to elaborately tell you the premise of the story. Ex Machina is also an amazing movie because of the themes it explores in the film and the dialogue that supports it. It questions existence, sexuality, nature or the natural versus synthetic, what it means to be human or be real. What is the morality of AI and what it really is life? Lines from Caleb and Nathan, like Nathan playing with the powers of God, perfectly further those conversations. It invites the audience to think about these topics as well as what is happening on the screen. The technical package in Ex Machina never distracts from the film's overall themes. Ex Machina's characters and their increasingly tense interplay absorb the viewer on a level that few films do, allowing the actors to deliver performances that feel lived in for much longer than the film's runtime. Ex Machina does more than simply just put the audiences on edge, although it sustains that feeling expertly. Inside Llewyn Davis isn't even top tier Coens. It's kind of drags on and shit happens to this guy who no one talks about. And no one talks about this as top tier Coen. Ex Machina is always brought up as top tier sci-fi and has 3 great actors firing on all cylinders.
And time. All right. Joe, back over to you. 2 minutes on the clock when ready.
I think sometimes especially when you watch so many movies, I think you expect a certain formula from movies. And I think that's exactly the opposite of what Inside Llewyn Davis does, which I think is what makes it so unique and so fantastic. Like I said, the Coens have always been able to create worlds of these characters and they always feel lived in. And I think that's exactly what Inside Llewyn Davis does. It shows this week in this life, this person who is very much down on his luck, but still carries on with this musical persona of his. And despite the fact that he never reaches that success, you still end up finding yourself by the end of it actually feeling very, very satisfied with what you've just seen. And I think that's a very, very rare and unique thing to do, which is what separates this movie from other movies of its kind and of just movies in general. Despite the fact this person doesn't reach their success and doesn't really develop, you still have that sense of satisfaction by the end of it. You see a week in his life, you are entertained because he meets these wonderful characters throughout. You have obviously the stuff with his ex-girlfriend, you have the stuff with Justin Timberlake, you have the stuff when John Goodman comes in and Garrett Hedlund come in, and all these little characters that just come in. They're all just little slices of life, people you know, people you might understand, and I think Ex Machina is a great sci-fi film. In fact, I saw a sci-fi film actually. It was about that, exactly that. This synthetic versus real AI. Do we have the right? What does life really mean? And it did develop the conversation. Unfortunately, that was in 1982, and that was Blade Runner. Ex Machina, despite does have great performances, but it asks the same questions that Blade Runner does. It doesn't add anything new to the conversation that wasn't added in 1982 when Blade Runner came out. But I think what Inside Llewyn Davis does is that you have these musical biopics about movies about characters, whether it be Crazy Heart or whether it be Sing Street, stuff like that. But you get that feeling at the end of the success of it. But it doesn't do that. It keeps it grounded and it introduces these wonderful characters, and it shows this person's journey that despite the difficulties, it's going to be all right. It might not go to the stratospheric success, but you still understand it's going to be all right, and you feel glad that you spent a week in this man's life.
And time. All right, we're going to go ahead and go into the open discussion. The timer will start when the first competitor speaks.
Yeah, you're right. Ex Machina is another movie that talks about questioning existence and what is life really. There's going to be continuous movies made about this because it's such a fascinating question. But the fact that Ex Machina does this expertly. That there's immense technical work behind the scenes that go on. The lighting, the colors, the camera work in this movie is exceptional. It just elevates the sci-fi-ness of this movie. Another thing that's so expertly done in this movie is the reveal of knowledge. This is a movie that relies on this to capture audiences and to keep their attention. You have little bits inside Llewyn Davis that capture your attention, like the John Goodman scene and the Please Mr. Kennedy. But again, I told you my problems with Please Mr. Kennedy scene is it's just so absurd. It doesn't fit the tone of the movie. And just having one good scene with John Goodman and not even his ex is really entertaining. Your movie is just boring. There's nothing really that happens into it.
But I would still go for something that has that uniqueness to it and does something that not many other movies do, as opposed to what is basically a budget version, a more contained version of telling the same story and asking the same questions that Blade Runner does. I think when you look at Inside Llewyn Davis, the things it gives you, it's just an insight into this normal person's life. If you don't find that entertaining, that's fine. But actually, going into a world that I don't really know too much about, the country music scene in the 1960s, it's not something you look at it on the surface and it's not something I'm really be interested in. But the way it tells that story just throughout, just showing these little excerpts of this man's life, bringing in these interesting characters throughout. It keeps that audience engaged, and the little slices of music throughout. That's just another thing that makes you just go, and you listen to the music and you go along, and it just offers you something different with every single scene. You have these sort of the domestic squabbles. You have the stuff going on with his music career. You have the stuff going on with the characters he meets. You have stuff going on with the cat that he's trying to bring back to his neighbor throughout. Every single little thing is just a tiny little piece. It's a dark comedy in the way that Coens do dark comedy really, really well. Is that it's this man that keeps going through all these struggles, but yet by the end of it, you still feel satisfied. You don't need to know, oh, I wish I'd seen a little bit more. Oh, I wish that they developed that story. No, you just feel satisfied by the end of it. Yes, it's good, like Ex Machina asking those questions at the end, what happens next? But it's exactly the same thing that gets with Blade Runner. And you've found out, 40 years later what happened next, and it was still fantastic.
We're not talking about Blade Runner, though. We're talking about Ex Machina. And
you're basically talking about Blade Runner.
The fact is, regardless, is that Ex Machina is top tier sci-fi, not even just I can't remember the director, not even his movies, but just top tier sci-fi in general. You're saying that inside Llewyn Davis, you're saying inside Llewyn Davis that the ending is satisfying. It's not satisfying at all because nothing changes. There's nothing furthering. Oh, we're satisfied with the way that this story is ending, the way this character is ending. Nothing changes with inside Llewyn. Nothing changes in his story. It's not interesting at all. And you're saying that
I think the important thing to remember is not you're looking at a week in this person's life. Things don't change. You have to sometimes
just because this movie is unique doesn't make it good. Even though Ex Machina is talking about themes that have already been talked about, the way that it does it makes it so interesting and so watchable, and it's just on another level in terms of excellence.
But I think the difference here is I'm not saying because it's unique, it's great. I'm saying it's unique and it's great because it has all these little things throughout it. Just because it shows a week in someone's life doesn't mean you have to see those changes. What I'm hearing from your argument about Ex Machina is that it asks these questions and it does these things artistically that have already been done. So it negates the argument of it being the best because these things have already been done in a different way and they've already been done before. Whereas Inside Llewyn Davis is unique and does things fantastically.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 1 minute closings. Noah, you are up first with yours. Time starts when you begin speaking.
I think the fact that it's something that's already been talked about and yet it is so interesting and people want to watch this movie speaks volumes about the actual the subject matter and what you're seeing on screen. Sure, Inside Llewyn Davis is unique. That doesn't make it good. And just because there's nothing interesting that happens, there's nothing to keep you watching this movie. It's a sad movie, honestly, and nothing changes in the end for Llewyn. Ex Machina is Alex Garland's directorial debut, who then goes on to direct Annihilation, and he got his start writing 28 days later. This film is absolutely breathtaking with every shot, tense with every line of dialogue, and captivating with each new twist and turn. There's never a dull moment, and every shot and scene in this movie matters. There is a reason Inside Llewyn Davis isn't talked about or remembered. It's because it's just not memorable. It's not even the best Coen Brothers film. Like stuff like No Country for Old Men and Fargo are the ones that are at the top of their list, and it's obvious because it's just not a watchable movie.
And time. All right, and then Joe, you have the final minute when ready.
Inside Llewyn Davis is not just great because it's unique. It's about the stuff contained within the story. Sometimes you have to see these things, and it does a wonderful job about creating a world, creating characters, bringing people in, music, cinematography, direction, screenwriting. Everything about Inside Llewyn Davis is fantastic. But you look at Blade Runner, yes, artistically and cinematography, it's fantastic and you have great performances. But everything it tries to bring to the table, everything about a movie, everything it tries to question has already been asked before and has been done in better ways. When you look at Inside Llewyn Davis, it creates this musical story. You look at a musical story, you look at what's been done before, and it tells you this is where they started and this is where they got the success. You look at films like Sing Street, you look at all those films like that and they do that, but this takes you on a completely different journey. It shows you just this insight, and it's a human story. It's a much more human story. It breaks it down. Oscar Isaac is fantastic. You have these characters, you have this fantastic music. Everything about it is what makes it an amazing movie, whereas Ex Machina does not live up to those standards because it asks the questions. For a sci-fi movie, it needs to ask unique questions, and it doesn't do that.
Sorry, time. All right. Go ahead and put you guys in the back and bring the judges on screen. All right, I will give it a second. It looked fine up until the end, but we may have had another problem arise. So, in that event, I was taking notes, so I can make a judgment if necessary. So I'm going to jump down. I'll flip it up. I'll go to Richie this time. Who gets your vote, and what was the main thing that sold you?
Yeah, this is close, but ultimately, I think Joe had just really good counterpoints as to I think Noah's hung up like nothing happens in Southern Davis, but I think he had good counterpoints to that, and he made a good point that as good as Age Marketer is, that we've seen before with Blade Runner, and it's sort of Inside the Davis is a new way of telling a story, a week in this guy's life. So I thought he made good points, so I went with Joe.
Okay, and then Carrie, over to you.
Yeah, I also went with Joe again this time. I just thought Joe had some really great points about how original and unique Inside Llewyn Davis was.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Thank you, guys. I will put the judges in the back, and we will go ahead and move on to question number 4 in this matchup. And question number 4 was a question that was sent in to us, and boy, is it a unique one. This was submitted by a fellow player of these competitors, this has to be easily one of the most unique questions that we've asked, which is why I love that we have people submit questions. The question was sent in to us by Austin Howell, and it is, what movie trope or cliche would you erase from film if you could? And we'll go ahead and get into this. Now, the other thing that I do want to give to the judges is, because this is a concept more than it is specifically like a one-off film, if that makes sense. Don't behold the competitors to the exact wording of how I wrote the question or the exact wording of how I wrote their answers. The concept is essentially erasing a movie trope or cliche, and their answers are just my attempt to synthesize their answers into words. Again, you should be arguing off of the concept on a whole. Who sells you on why this concept shouldn't exist? I only put that out there because I know judges will oftentimes, and again, that is the judge's decision to look at the wording of a question and see how it applies to the answers. But more than ever, I'm asking not to behold them to that, because this is a very expressive type of argument. But with that said, Noah, you are going to be up first for this one. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you. The timer will start back when you begin speaking.
I thought it was Joe on this one.
It's me on that one.
Yeah, sure, Joe. That was it is. You're right. You're 100% correct. Joe, go ahead.
There are a lot of bad movie cliches and tropes and stuff out there. But for me, I think the worst cliches are the ones that make you sigh, oh, not this again. I think the worst ones, though, are the ones that are also not based in any form of reality. And for me, the worst ones are basically things exploding that shouldn't explode. I think the best example of this where it works is in American Psycho, which is likely, well, everyone who knows American Psycho knows that doesn't know what's going on, what's a dream and what's not, but there's a dream sequence where Patrick Bateman shoots at a cop car and the thing just explodes and he just looks at his gun and is like, what? And that's exactly what I do most of the time when you see these things. Look, movies, you have to have some sort of, there's some suspension of disbelief, but in terms of things physically exploding and the size of the explosions, and Michael Bay is probably the worst culprit for this, it's just something that should go.
And time. All right, we're going to go back over to you, Noah. Time starts when you begin speaking.
When it comes to annoying movie tropes, and tropes that need to be erased from movies, you have to look about how it affects the movie as a whole. You have to look at what is frustrating that movies do over and over again that really make no difference, that really end up doing nothing for the film in general, and just make the audience groan and sigh every time they witness it. And the wording on my answer is a little weird, so sorry, Aaron. But Mine is the spouse of the protagonist getting mad at them for focusing on something important over them. Basically, it's just a cheap way of inserting drama in a movie, and it's cheap and it's lazy, and it's just straight up not fun or interesting, and it's quite annoying.
And time. All right. So I do just want to interject. This is more for the judge, the competitors, than anything else. So I was speaking to him behind the scenes while you guys were debating, and we've made the decision. Haven is going to drop out at this point, so I will take over serving as third judge should it be necessary. But I just wanted you guys to know so that you weren't blindsided by anything there. Haven, we thank you for your participation, man. Sorry that it didn't work out tonight. But with that said, Joe, we're going to go ahead and move on over to you. You have 2 minutes on the clock when you're ready.
The problem with things exploding when they shouldn't is that it's an easy out. Most of the time, it's a simple escape for the character. They shoot something, it explodes, that gives them the opportunity to escape. And I think that's the worst problem with it, is that it's lazy. You know, instead of a writer creating a simple method or a simple way for them to get out of the situation, they have this explosion, and that wipes out most of the bad guys, or it creates a diversion. And I think that's really the worst thing about this trope, is that they defy reality in order to create themselves a simple out. I actually think a spouse or a partner getting angry about not getting the attention, even though they should be focusing on something important, is actually not the worst as a movie cliche. Because unfortunately, I think it's something that is actually quite common in actual life. And I think it's something that does have a basis in reality. And I think it comes down to lack of communication, which in itself is another problem in movies in general, when characters maybe could have just solved things with a simple conversation. But I think Noah's cliche actually speaks a little bit more to real life. And I think, whereas it may be a frustrating cliche, I think it's more of a frustrating cliche about real life and movies, as opposed to just being in movies. But the issue with things just exploding when they shouldn't, I think, is more of an issue that defies reality and speaks to lazy writing and speaks to a little bit of carelessness in terms of direction, screenwriting, and all these other things. And that's where I think the difference truly lies between these two cliches. I think one definitely has the basis in reality, whereas mine, you know, it's all based in reality. You know, a petrol tank won't explode if you shoot at it. It just won't. You know, unless it's physically open and the petrol is leaking from it, these things don't happen. And I think the size of the explosions is always a concern. And then again, it just speaks to that lazy writing, creating an easy out for a character, creating an easy resolution to a situation, whereas a little bit of thinking, screenwriting could have changed.
And time. All right. Noah, back over to you. You have 2 minutes on the clock, sir.
Joe even said it himself that movies are supposed to, we go into films knowing we're trying to suspend disbelief a little bit. Not everything that we're going to see here is going to be realistic. And that's something that we all accept when we walk into the movie theater. Movies are a spectacle. Having things explode is a part of that spectacle. Michael Bay gets made fun of this a lot when he has things exploding, but it actually becomes kind of enjoyable and funny. It can be a source of comedy. Parodies do it all the time. But it's a part of that spectacle. It's fun to watch sometimes. Everyone likes seeing things explode. And in terms of lazy writing, sure, if you want to say that's lazy writing, go ahead. But the worst perpetrator of this is the fact that the spouses are constantly getting annoyed at the other for, like, if it's a hero, for focusing on saving the world or doing all this extremely important stuff that's not focused on them, and they get upset that, oh, your attention's not on me. It's really very selfish for the character. And one, we want to get out of reality. So if that's something that's happening in your life, you kind of don't want to see it happening on screen, because it's just going to make things worse. But it's just a lazy way for writers to introduce drama and tension into the time period where there's already supposed to be tension from whatever the hero is facing. So inserting this is useless. There's no reason to continue having this in film. But having things explode doesn't really detract from the viewing experience. You know, it's supposed to be, film is supposed to be a spectacle, and having things explode is always enjoyable to watch.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the open discussion. The timer will start when the first competitor speaks.
One would have hoped that 10 years ago when 21 Jump Street came out, that somebody would have got the message. You know, oh, I really thought that one would have exploded. Oh, what another thing to explode. That was that cliche done really well, because it was pointing out how ridiculous the cliche is. I think, yes, those things that those disagreements between the characters and their spouses, it can be selfish for a character, but characters can be selfish. And I think that's a realistic thing that happens in real life, but I think it's a good way of reflecting it in a movie because it's basing it in some form of reality. The problem with the things exploding, as I said, it's just, oh, how are we going to get him out of this? Oh, have him shoot the petrol tank and it explodes. That wouldn't happen. No one's paying attention. You know, I think that's where the issue comes from, is where your cliche has basis in reality and is a source of genuine conflict in genuine relationships, whereas this one is just a complete suspension. All they have to do is create a realistic way in which something would explode. They can write that in, but it's lazy.
You're trying to focus on that movies have to be realistic, movies have to do this. There's movies about superheroes. We're expecting those movies to be realistic. We understand that it's not going to be exactly like real life, and that's what we want from movies. We're trying to be taken out of reality. We're trying to be taken out of our own lives. And so if you insert something that's happening in your own life, it's just going to turn you off to the entire thing. Having things explode doesn't do that at all. We understand that it's not going to be realistic. We understand that we're not expected to walk out of the movie theater. Don't do this, but like shoot a car, and we understand it's not going to explode. But it's just fun to watch on screen.
Things exploding. It's about things exploding that shouldn't explode.
Right.
That was the specific part of the cliche, you know, and that's that scene on the bridge in 21 Jump Street, I think perfectly encapsulates what I'm talking about here. You know, they shoot the petrol tanker, it doesn't explode because it shouldn't explode. And then it does the thing with the truck of chickens exploding, and that makes a massive explosion, and they point out how ridiculous that is.
Exactly. You're pointing out exactly.
But that's when it works, when they're pointing out that it's a stupid cliche.
Exactly. It works in the movie, and it's a source of comedy.
Because they're pointing out the cliche.
It's a parody.
You'd think it would end at that point. All it requires is a simple bit of writing to explain why something explodes. You know, that it's a very, you can make it very simple. You can have somebody, oh look, there's we're showing the petrol leaking, but no, he's just going to shoot the petrol tank and it explodes. That's the point. You could add a 2-second frame into it and completely remove the cliche, because it would explain why something is exploding when it should. Whereas
continuing to further the point, though, why it has to stay in movies, why you shouldn't take it out, is because it's done in these parody ways. It's because it's done funny. It's done with comedy. Like there's not a reason why you should be taking this out. With why spouses getting upset, it's just another way of creating tension, and it doesn't even work. It doesn't work as a way.
It is genuine. That's why it works, because it is something.
No, because you just get annoyed with that spouse, because you're like, why don't you understand that they need to do this, because this is important. This needs to happen for the sake of the world or other people. It's not a selfish thing for that person to go out and being a hero, and yet the spouse is getting upset, and it's not. It's just annoying. You end up hating that character.
It's more of a development, I think, of a lack of communication, which I think is a huge problem in movies. That's, I think, the worst cliche is actually than yours, is something that isn't communicated when a simple conversation would have solved it. I think someone getting genuinely upset when there's a lack of communication, when there's a lack of this, I think that's something that's very genuine and something that you can relate to, and I think an audience can relate to in itself. Whether depends on what side of it you're on. You can be on that side that thinks this is more important, or you can be on the side that wants that attention. And I think both ways you can relate to it. Whereas I think with my cliche, it's something that's already been pointed out in another movie that it's ridiculous, yet they continue with it.
And time. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into the 1-minute closings. Joe, you are up first, so the timer will start when the first competitor speaks.
The cliche of things exploding when they shouldn't explode is something that can be solved by just adding a couple of frames to a movie. It's something very simple, but yet it doesn't happen, and it speaks to lazy writing. And something that is very common in these sort of action films is where people want to see explosions, And that's what people focus on. Yeah. Whereas it would be very simple just to add a couple of frames to make people understand why this explosion is happening, making it a little bit more realistic. It was already parody. It was already pointed out to be a stupid cliche 10 years ago, yet it's still something that hasn't gone away. Whereas I think a character getting upset about lack of attention, even though the main character has something more important to focus on, I think that's something that is very genuine and something that a lot of people can relate to, regardless of what side of that argument you fall on, whether you are on the person that's not getting the attention or the person that's got something maybe in your mind more important to focus on. I think that's something very genuine. It may be a common source of conflict, but that's in movies, but that's because it can be a common source of conflict in real life, which is why I don't think it necessarily is a trope that should go away. It may be something in life that should go away, but in movies, it's not something that should go away. It's more about a lack of communication, which is very common.
And time. All right, and then Noah, back over to you. 2 minutes on the clock for the remaining, or 1 minute. Fuck, Jesus, I do this on the regular, don't I?
Joe is trying to hypothesize and change my answer from what it is to saying, oh, it's just a lack of communication. That's not what the trope is. That's not what I'm trying to say. It doesn't feel genuine. It feels fake. It feels forced every time that they do this, because it's something the writers are trying to shoehorn in to create more tension for the hero. You don't end up sympathizing with the spouse. You end up hating them and being annoyed by them because they're not understanding that something is important than them and it has to be done. And just unfortunately, they can't have attention. It's his cliche continues to be pointed out in movies and done in movies, obviously 10 years after 21 Jump Street, because it is entertaining. It's fun to watch. It can be done in parodies, which is why it shouldn't be taken in movies, because it can be done in parodies. And even when it's done in parody and real movies, it's just fun, and it's supposed to be a spectacle.
And time. All right, guys, another great round. I'm going to go ahead and put you guys both in the back and bring the judges on screen for the deliberation. So I know normally I go last when I judge, but if you guys don't mind, I'm going to go first just because it's the only question I've judged so far. I thought this was a really great debate, but truthfully, I always respect competitors when they can argue outside of the box concepts well, and I thought both of these guys did a great job at explaining themselves truthfully. In my opinion, I give the slight edge to Noah on this, simply because I think that the point of the explosions was refuted well enough in saying that most of its use even nowadays is for more comedic effect or parody in and of itself. Any of the actual mentions that were brought up are in high tense scenes or action scenes or parody comedy, whereas Noah made a great point, in my opinion, that while Joe did say that it could come down to poor communication, it's more the concept of what he's arguing is the selfishness of a character essentially in a specific situation. And in his cliche, the selfishness always applies when somebody has a greater thing that needs to be done, and it feels like an easy way of adding drama when the drama is supposed to be what the problem is at hand. And I thought that that was actually a really great point of both explaining it and supporting how he was trying to argue for it. So I give the edge to Noah. Carrie, I'll go to you next. Who got your vote, and what was the main point that sold it?
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you, and I'm giving my point to Noah for this one. It was really close. Again, these are both great debaters. I just gave the edge to Noah just because I thought he had some great points about explosions. They can still be fun. They can still be made fun of. And I know Joe had the point about how, maybe this, a spouse kind of wanting attention is realistic. And I agree, but in some ways it's, do you want to watch something that's that realistic in a movie? I don't know. So I gave it to Noah.
All right. Well, judges, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and drop you in the back, and we will bring the competitors back in. And you're going to go ahead and go on to the blind round. Here is how this works. The competitors are going to be given a question that they've had no chance to prepare for. It's something that's coming out of left field. They do not know where this is going to go. I will give them a generalized prompt of a question. My classic example has been name me a Will Smith movie. They will answer the generalized prompt that I give them. That will be followed by the reveal of what the actual question is. Even if they feel that their answer doesn't quite meet the specific question, they will have to do their best to argue for it. They will get a couple of minutes behind the scenes off screen to put some arguments together, at which point they will come back and debate. Other than that, all the rules of the game are the same. The debate will run the same amount of time, and the judges will rule off the arguments. With that said, you guys have both done excellently tonight so far. Are you ready to go into the blind round?
Yeah, I should remember there's Americans judging. I shouldn't have dissed explosions. Sorry.
That's probably a fair point. That is what it is. You probably had Richie's support. We'll figure that out in the off-screen part. We'll go ahead and bring it in. All right, guys, when you are both ready.
Yep.
Okay. The question is, or your prompt. Name me a comedy film from the 1980s. And remember, whoever answers first will be going first. This is not to encourage you to sit on your answer for longer. This is just a reminder. And also, you are allowed to do a quick Google search if you want to remind yourself of potential options. That's also on the table.
Airplane.
Airplane? Okay. You could cut the tension with Patrick Bateman's knife.
Oh God. Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice. Okay. Shout out to Tim Burton for spelling the title the phonetical way and not whatever fucked up way it is in the movie. All right. We have Airplane versus Beetlejuice, the battle of one name title films. This question is not one word. It is, what is the worst comedy released in the 1980s? So with that said, you guys are going to have a couple minutes behind the scenes to put those arguments together. We'll be back in just a moment with your blind round. And we are back from the blind round. To remind people at home, the general prompt they were given was to name me a comedy film from the 1980s. They named Airplane and they named Beetlejuice. I think we can all, let's sit here. Let's put the pretense out of our minds that we all know these are great films, but they're going to argue why they're fucking awful. So let's just keep that in mind, right? We all know this is facetious. We all know we're pulling a Henry. We're all bullshitting out of our ass. But let's argue about why these two films are horrible. With that said, Joe, you did answer first, so you have the time to go first. I want to say you guys have both been excellent tonight. Do not let a round like this define how either of you feel walking out of this match. With that said, though, may the best debater win. Joe, the timer will start for you when you begin speaking.
Comedy is subjective. What was funny at its time might not necessarily be funny now. But for me, I think one of the worst examples of this worst comedy released in the 1980s, especially viewing it through 2022 eyes, is Airplane. It's full of topical jokes which don't hold up anymore. So it can only be a comedy that can only very work in a very small space of time. It's full of racist jokes, the Air Israel stuff, the jive talking. Most of the it's unoriginal. Most of the dialogue is taken from the film's 0 Hour and Flight Through Danger, and it's just spoken. The lines are just spoken in a different way to make them sound funny. There's a whole scene of a woman being slapped around the plane. He's advocating that violence against women. Racism. It's not done in a satirical way like in Blazing Saddles, where it's making fun of the racists. It's just racist jokes. I think Leslie Nielsen was funnier in the Naked Gun movies. I think Lloyd Bridges was funnier in Hot Shots. Slapstick is tired.
And time. All right, Noah, over to you. Time starts when you begin speaking.
Joe's gonna try to tell you that this movie is his movie is awful, and it's the worst one. I'm here to tell you that both these movies are good movies, but I'm gonna tell you why Beetlejuice is worse than Airplane. Um, Beetlejuice is still a good movie, but it's not as good as Airplane, and it's not as effective as what Airplane does. Comedies are supposed to be funny, yes, but comedy is a way to make light of tension. It's a way to help people deal with certain topics, and Airplane is the perfect example of a movie doing that. Beetlejuice really is it has a niche audience. This movie is for like the huge fans of Tim Burton. This is for the fans of the non sequitur and the strange. And this movie doesn't really cater to everyone. This movie is very niche and community based. But Airplane works for all people.
And time. All right, Joe, back over to you. 2 minutes on the clock when ready.
I think what makes Airplane the worst comedy released in the 1980s is just the fact that the comedy is just it's very small, it's very of its time. Whereas I think Beetlejuice, what makes it a great comedy is that even after nearly over 30 years, I think it still holds up. I think those jokes are still funny. You have the jokes like the football team coming in not quite understanding that they're dead. You talk about dealing with tension. This movie dealing with death, and it still seems to make it funny. The joke. It's a very dark joke about how people who commit suicide end up civil servants, and then you see the civil servants in that afterlife. It has a very unique view of the afterlife. It doesn't lose that Tim Burton-ness to it, yet it's still, I think, a very accessible movie. There's a reason people still dress up as Beetlejuice for Halloween. There's a reason that they're talking about a sequel. There's a reason that they're going to bring out a musical. There's a reason that it's regarded as one of Keaton's best comedic performances. It's got a unique and funny view of the afterlife. It's watched every year. I think the problem with Airplane, I think there's no real memorable characters. There's some memorable lines, and there's some jokes that obviously don't fall under that racist or misogynistic category. But I think the issue with it is there are a lot of jokes that do, whereas you don't get that in Beetlejuice. You get jokes that are still funny today. You get the use of the Harry Belafonte music. You don't lose that Burton style. You've got quotable lines. Showtime, nice fucking model, all this sort of stuff that there are really some fun, and the whole banana boat song scene at the dinner table, just visually that is funny. The dialogue wise, that is fun. That is just really funny. I think the problem with Airplane is that the jokes, especially like the stuff around, that's Lieutenant Hurwitz, he thinks he's Ethel Merman. That doesn't work now, whereas the things in Beetlejuice, they still work now and they're still funny now. I think a comedy that can hold up after 30 years, I think that's an amazing achievement. Whereas Airplane, where it has funny moments and it has some funny jokes, I think a lot of them do not hold up today. And even at the time, even if people would have found them funny then, I think there are people in certain communities that would look at that and go, even then, that's not funny. Whereas I think in Beetlejuice, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything about that makes people go, oh, I'm not sure about that.
And time. All right, Noah, back over to you, sir. 2 minutes on the clock when ready.
Beetlejuice gets off to a start that's so charming that it never lives it down. The movie is all anticlimax once you realize it's just going to be about gimmicks and not really about characters. The character of Beetlejuice is really kind of hazy because the writers can never decide if he's a villain or just an anti-hero. The story, which seems so original, turns into a sitcom that's fueled by lots of special effects and weird sets and props, and the inspiration is really gone. There's a lot of fun scenes in here, a lot of good scenes, but it doesn't compare to anything that Airplane does. 40 years later, Airplane just feels so wrong for its politically incorrect jokes and raunchy theatrics. I said that so wrong, but that's actually what makes it so right. It reminds us of the importance of pushing boundaries at the same time that it gives us a playbook for doing so in a good-natured rather than vicious or belittling way. One of the reasons why Airplane works so as well as it does is because those actors who play their lines with just a deadpan performance. If not for his role as Dr. Romek, Leslie Nielsen doesn't really become known for starring in so many comedy spoofs. I lost my place. There are other appearances by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Peter Graves, Robert Stack, Lloyd Bridges, Barbara Billingsley, and so many other cameos. This film has such a great script that the potential for favorite quotes is just remarkably high. It wowed critics and audiences with its fast and loose brand of humor, and it remains one of the most consistently uproarious laugh fests ever filmed. It became an instant comedy classic when it hit screens. It still is relevant today. Teenagers are still talking about this movie today, and you know you've made something that lasts when teenagers are still talking about it. Yeah, Beetlejuice is a costume every year, but that's it.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer will start back up when the first competitor speaks.
But the thing is, people are still talking about Beetlejuice. There's a sequel. There's a sequel coming. There's a musical coming out. People are still talking about it. It still invites an audience. The thing about Beetlejuice, it doesn't alienate any members of its audience. Whereas I think where Airplane does have funny jokes in the same way that Beetlejuice has funny jokes, there's nothing about it that alienates its audience. And I think a true comedy is someone that will still hold up and will still bring in an audience and doesn't alienate parts of its audience because it's taking cheap shots. There are clever ways you can push the boundaries. Like I mentioned before, Blazing Saddles does it really well. It's a movie from the 70s, so it doesn't really matter. But the point is, that's a movie that can push the boundaries without alienating its audience. But the jokes that are supposed to push the boundaries in Airplane are ones that, unfortunately, they punch down. And that's just something that, is not acceptable.
It doesn't alienate audiences because it makes fun of everyone equally. When you're sitting at a table with a bunch of friends and you guys are all just shitting on each other, you're laughing because it's funny, because it's not serious at all, and that's exactly what this movie is. It's taking jokes and use them to a way to move society and culture forward. It's using it as a way of communicating and say, hey, this is what's going on. We're making fun of it, but it's also a way to talk about it. It's a way of communication.
I think the issue with the way of communication is that the jokes in Airplane are literally, this is how some members of the black community talk. Isn't it funny? This is how members of the Israeli community dress. Isn't it funny? Because we've put a beard and a scarf and a yarmulke on a plane. Ha ha ha! Isn't that funny? Whereas Beetlejuice, the only real sort of target of the main jokes is how bad a person the demon, Beetlejuice is. That doesn't alienate anybody because that's an entity that doesn't really exist. Whereas what it really does is that it creates this amazing version of the afterlife, something that I don't think anyone has ever sort of pictured the afterlife being before, and creates this world I think we can all relate to, because no one knows what the afterlife is. And I think it's a really funny way to sort of make it as grounded in our world as we possibly can. But the fact of it is, both movies are very, very quotable, but I think the difference is there's nothing about Beetlejuice that alienates anyone.
It doesn't take risks. And comedy is all about taking risks. And we're trying to argue what the worst comedy is. And in terms of comedy, Airplane just has way better jokes, way better lines than Beetlejuice does. Sure, Beetlejuice has its memorable lines and moments that people still repeat. There's so much more in Airplane that people say and repeat today. But Beetlejuice is really just about being bizarre and about being weird more than it is about actual comedy.
But I think the true comedy that comes from Airplane is when you look at it, it's making fun of those movies from the 70s, those airplane disaster movies, which is something that an audience today wouldn't understand. There's something that even audiences a couple of years down the line from Airplane being released wouldn't necessarily understand. That's not to say that it's a bad movie, because it was funny at the time. But I think what makes Beetlejuice stand apart is that even after 30 years, it's something that can be revisited by an audience of any age. It can be revisited by an audience of any understanding of what came before or what's come since. And you can still find those jokes funny and still understand the meaning behind the jokes and where they come from. And I think it's not just the jokes themselves, it's everything about the jokes. We all understand about sort of this idea of the afterlife, and that's what these jokes create. Whereas Airplane itself, a lot of the humor comes from it being a parody, but if you don't understand where the parody is coming from, a lot of those jokes are lost on you, and then it alienates the other part of the audience by its racist and misogynistic humor.
You can't place when a movie came out, and you're saying that's its detriment. You're saying that this movie's detriment is that it was made in the 80s and it's made only for audiences in the 80s. It's going to create a spoof and a parody of movies at that time, because that's what the movies were in the time. It's not trying to think about the future. And I'll talk more in a little bit.
And time. All right. We got 1 minute left in the game for each of you. Joe, your minute is up first. The timer will start back up for you, sir, when you begin speaking.
Yes, Airplane is of its time, and yes, it was considered funny at the time. But the point of the point of it being a parody, and the point of that racist and misogynistic humor, isn't necessarily why it isn't funny. It's just why it doesn't hold up to the standard that Beetlejuice does, and why it isn't as funny as Beetlejuice. What makes Beetlejuice more unique is that it is only 8 years younger than Airplane as a movie, yet it holds up more. The jokes hold up more. The jokes are still relevant. The jokes are still funny. And I think just when you make a comedy and you make jokes that you're aiming at your audience at the time, if they are still relevant to an audience that is coming 30 years later, I think that's something very unique and very, very special. I think it creates a very unique world. I think the jokes in it are very funny. It's still a very quotable movie, whereas the issue with Airplane, a lot of the jokes are topical, not just the parody stuff, and it's getting rid of the racist misogynist stuff. You have references like to people like Ethel Merman that people wouldn't understand anymore. Whereas Beetlejuice itself is a movie that's self-contained, holds up, continues great performances. Whereas the performances of the comedy actors in Airplane, they do better jobs than other movies.
And time. All right, we're going to go back over to you, Noah. Final minute on the clock when you begin speaking.
In terms of still being relevant, if you go on Rotten Tomatoes and look at reviews, there are numerous reviews within the past 5 years about a movie who was released in the 1980s. That speaks volumes about the lasting effects of Airplane and just the genius of it. In writing and directing Airplane, the creative triumvirate of Jerry Zucker, Jim Abrams, and David Zucker combined vaudevillain humor, oddball non sequiturs, dirty jokes, and visual gags into a unique flurry of funny. One can rewatch the film and uncover new visual and verbal jokes because they packed in so many punchlines to this movie. This movie really focuses on the comedy, and that's what we're trying to argue. What's the worst comedy? In a movie that packs in so much that you can go back on repeat viewings and pick up more and more. It's astounding. Beetlejuice really is just for the aesthetic. It's niche for that group, and it has some comedy, but not nearly as good and not as Airplane.
All right, guys. Excellent job, both of you. This was a hell of a match, but let's see how it ends. I'm going to go ahead and put both of you guys in the back. I will bring in our judges, and we'll make the final deliberation here. Richie, I'm going to go over to you, sir. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
Yeah, no, this is. I mean, I don't envy these guys. I haven't done a blind run yet. I'm not looking forward to it when it does happen. But yeah, no, it was pretty hard given that's probably not the direction that you thought the question was going to go to. But in saying that, yeah, I ultimately gave it to Joe. I think he I think he did a good job explaining why it was why it was a bad comedy, as well as saying explaining why a Beetlejuice is better in terms of Airplane's a bit more topical of the time, whereas Beetlejuice is timeless. And I didn't hear much from Noah as far as why Beetlejuice would be the worst comedy of the 80s. He even gave the film credit at the start. So I think, ultimately I went with Joe, but yeah, it's a tall order, so I applaud both guys.
All right, and then carry on to you. Who gets your vote?
Okay, I went with Joe as well. I thought both competitors had really great points, especially given the two movies they chose. I think we all agree are really great comedies. But I think for Joe, ultimately, I think he just convinced me that Airplane really doesn't hold up and probably isn't as funny to audiences today as Beetlejuice is.
All right. Well, judges, thank you guys so much. Chad, shout out to you as well for helping out in the start. But I'm going to go ahead and put everyone in the back because your winner with a final score of 3-2, it is Joe Hot Fuzz Farrelly. That's badly transitioned, but it's really late for Joe, so I'm not going to bother killing anybody's time here. We're going to go ahead and close this out. Joe, congratulations, sir. That was a very good match between the both of you guys. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
Yeah, I tried something new. I tried to go in without actually, I watched the movies. I knew where I was going, but I didn't actually fully prep I usually have an opening, closing, and prepared, and knowing where I'm going to go with it. I sort of winged it. Apart from that last one, obviously we had 10 minutes, and obviously it was the decider, so I did a little bit more work. Noah came up with some really great arguments, with some really great points there. Had me on the ropes for a lot of the questions. Obviously, winning that first one, I think it showed where prep is so important. But in terms of things like the MCU, this is stuff. This is my geek. That's my geek stuff. And the final one, I didn't know where you were going with the question, so I literally went with something I could argue is the best and something I could find arguments to say why it's the worst. And that's just I hoped it was going one of those two ways, but you could have been asking for which one deserves a remake. I didn't know where it was going to go, so it could have been
that would have been a very different argument. No, so absolutely. And so to all of you watching at home, and I guess to our judges as well in the back, this next comment is going to be a spoiler on our match that went up yesterday between John Marr and Will Cohen. So mute the screen, close your ears if you don't want to hear who won. But Joe, you are moving on to the next round of the tournament, and that does mean you will be taking on Will Cohen, who took out John Marr in the match, continuing his excellent run in the tournament of upsetting people who are higher than him in the seeds, and you yourself are obviously up near the top of the standings. So what are your thoughts on Will as a competitor going into that match?
Haven't seen a lot of Will stuff, to be honest. But like everything, we'll get in the green room. We'll see what the options are, what the questions are, and we'll see where we go from there. But I think this has taught me that definitely a little bit more prep is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely, sir. Well, congratulations to yourself. We will see you in the next round. Get some rest, God help you. We will send you to the back as we bring in your opponent, Noah McCausland. And Noah, listen, man, obviously this is the end of your season. I know how much you like debating and you love being here and the time you put into the prep. So 4-4 is a record that I know you probably don't love to see, but I have to give you some plaudits at the end of the season because all 4 of your losses have come against people at the upper echelon of this league. Your very first game was against the current champion, Henry Sanchez. Getting a vote would have done something, being considered a win in that game, despite how it went. Your other losses to Joe, a former 2-time champ tonight, to Amaru, the guy who is currently in the next title match, on his way to that title match. I also beat you, but that was early on. Let's not take that too much. You're an excellent debater, man. When you played Amaru, when you played Joe here tonight, even though you don't get the win, you have spent the year pushing these top competitors to the final brink of this match, and you've gotten better and better as you've gone on. So what are your thoughts overall? Keeping in mind, of course, that losing sucks. We all know it.
Yeah, losing sucks. And I thought I had a couple. I know it was a really slim fight, but I thought in a couple of the questions I had a little bit of a lead, but that's just me being a little cocky because in this game, let's face it, kind of have to be. But
look at our champ.
I like you said, everyone who I've lost to is in that upper echelon of debaters, and I just want myself to be in that talk. And the fact that I continue to lose to those kind of players is a little disheartening. Yeah, I do this for fun and I like debating, but again, like I always want to be one of the best. I always want to be up there as well. And so, it is daunting to go up against people like Joe and Amaru, but I feel like it. I don't know. I guess I'm just rambling at this point, but I'm not sad that I lost against Joe. Maybe a little disappointed in myself, but I just know it was a good match, and I continue to push these competitors to the end. But I just hope at some point it turns in my favor. So.
Absolutely. Well, now you'll get a resting period. You'll get some time off. You don't have to think about me or my damn debate questions at all. And you can come back next year refreshed and ready to go. It's been a hell of a run, sir. Congratulations. And we will see you next year on the show. All right, and that will be the end of our match. Joe pulls it away with a tough fought victory, but doing very well for himself. I mean, continuing to establish that even though he is a former champion, he is still a competitor of champion caliber. And guys, that is it for round 2 of our tournament. We are all finished up, and we will be moving in to the semifinals of this tournament coming at you in December. We're going to take another week off, but Saturday, December 10th, and Sunday, December 11th, we are going to have the semifinals for you, and there they are right there. We have Jay Burns versus Austin Howell, and we have Joe Farrelly taking on Will Cohen, pulling off the upset again. 4 big names, big personalities in that final 4. So it'll be interesting to see how this shapes out. But guys, that is it for everyone tonight here on the Battleground. I want to thank everyone first off for bearing with me both on video and behind the scenes over the sort of continuous shifting of personalities within this video. Not normally what happens in these matches, but they worked around me and then I worked around them. So it is what happened. I want to thank my judges, fucking hell. I want to thank my judges, Carrie, Chad, for hosting at the start as well. I made their names one. I also want to thank Richie and Haven for being here. I want to say congratulations to Joe Farrelly, and thank you to Noah McCausland. You put up a great fight, buddy. Sorry it didn't work out, but that is going to be it. So for everyone here at the Movie Battleground, my name is Aaron Knoll, and we'll see you next time. Take care.